Okay, this is a nice little report, relatively short, on how to manage agricultural impacts on air pollution and health. What am I doing here? I didn't put the source of the report, which I should. Let me do that. At least a DOI is needed. It's a technical brief from the World Health Organization. There we go. So it's called Agricultural Sectoral Pollutions and Health, a technical brief, as it says here. But it's basically by WMO, so you will have to Google to get the report, and it is available freely online. Okay, they don't seem to provide any DOI, so I will skip that part, and sorry for doing this in real time. Anyways, agricultural sectoral solutions for air pollution and health. So there is the matter of what we already know in terms of the emissions and health impacts, and the role of governments and organizations like WHO and FAO and whoever else is involved. So there are short-term priorities, long-term priorities, and what role each organization that is responsible in some way or in a position to advise can do. So let's read off the key points. Key messages: air pollution from agriculture is responsible for a significant health and economic burden in many countries and regions. We have discussed air pollution, emissions from agriculture, which amounts to about 25% of the total, and we have discussed measures to reduce agricultural impacts, not only on emissions but also on carbon capture into the soil and so on. Though a less well acknowledged source than other sectors such as energy, agriculture is an important contributor to air pollution and climate change, as well as the impacts on human health. Emissions also damage crops and decrease yields, harm ecosystems and decrease biodiversity. So things like ozone are shown to be bad for crop health and crop yields, and of course emissions in general create solar dimming and other problems, acid rain as well in some cases, etc. Urban areas face poor air quality and consequent health effects, but rural and agricultural areas also suffer high levels of air pollution, air pollutants and chemicals, and their health effects are underreported. So urban centers get a lot of attention for their extreme event issues, climate impacts and their contribution to climate change and so on, but rural areas and rural populations' health issues from agriculture itself has to be given more attention. Agriculture is a key sector in which measures to improve air quality, clean energy access, and climate change mitigation are important. We have discussed this in indirect ways or direct ways in terms of enhancing carbon sinks and reducing sources and various agricultural methods, agroforestry, reduced tillage, etc. Climate and health benefits arise from actions to decrease agricultural air pollution, so there are co-benefits to climate mitigation as well as for human health. Cutting air pollution from agriculture promotes the health of people and animals, saves money, and reduces damage to ecosystems and biodiversity. So we underestimate the impact of pollution on animals, especially livestock, and their milk yield, dairy products, etc. So we have to also worry about that. Sustainable agriculture can provide healthy food while ensuring clean air and supporting natural ecosystems. So nature-based solutions can work in many detailed ways where co-benefits are quite significant. What are the priority actions for short-term impacts? We have to recognize the different connections between agriculture, air pollution, and climate change by improving air quality monitoring in rural areas and establishing rural emissions inventories. Currently, there is a lack of measured data from rural areas on air pollutants and harmful chemicals. Urban centers typically have air pollution measurements and displays of air quality index parameters in many cities, and it's considered a good thing, but who's doing similar things for rural areas? If you drive around rural areas, you will not see any such displays of air quality. quality, right? Implement no-burn alternatives to crop residues. This comes up all the time. Crop residue burning is an easy economic solution, but it has a lot of externalities in terms of air pollution and health. So if you want to incentivize farmers not to do that, then you have to pay to account for their external impacts or indirect impacts, so that hiring a tractor may be very expensive compared to just burning the crop residue. And slash and burn used to be a method, but in large scales, obviously, it's a very dangerous practice. Move to sustainable agricultural practices and produce healthier food. Reduce pesticide and herbicide use, which we have discussed elsewhere as organic agriculture, low tillage, no tillage, organic pesticides and herbicides and so on, as well as fertilizers. Address emissions of ammonia, nitrous oxide and methane from livestock systems. We'll see a figure of how these emissions arise. Move to sustainable management of manure. We've talked about covering these biogas producers or manure management systems can reduce methane emissions. Methane is getting more and more attention because we had focused a little too much on CO2, but methane is much more potent, 25 times as much a greenhouse warming potential. Integrate actions to reduce ammonia emissions from agriculture into clean air policies and regulations. So improving nutrient efficiency of livestock production. We have discussed many methods on how there are food additives, fodder additives that can reduce emissions of methane from livestock ruminators and so on. Implement sustainable management of synthetic fertilizers which emit ammonia and nitrous oxide, and at the same time promote the use of organic fertilizers to recycle nutrients, prevent nutrient losses throughout the entire agricultural production chain in terms of a circular economy idea. Priority actions for long-term impacts then. These were the short-term impacts. So long-term, what can we do? Support energy transition. So that's climate mitigation as well as reducing energy use in agricultural sectors, because that also energy use also goes into fertilizer and feed, on-farm energy, transport of the food, pre-processing, inputs to agriculture, as well as transport of outputs and food processing emissions, etc. Protect ecosystem biodiversity. We have discussed how agriculture can include nature-based solutions through agroforestry, tree-based farming, and various other measures. Reduce not only air quality impacts but also water quality impacts, which can affect ecosystem biodiversity. Promote and adopt healthier diets. This is a behavioral issue, not always easy, but how can we incentivize it? Organic foods are generally expensive and they are luxury goods, but how can you make everybody eat healthier and reduce emissions in the meantime? Some additional points apart from the executive summary kind of points. Agriculture related air pollution and health impacts. The contribution of agriculture to air pollution and climate change is significant but not well acknowledged. As we said, agriculture contributes to air pollution in particular through emissions of ammonia, which is a colorless irritant gas from, for example, manure in confined animal feeding operations and synthetic fertilizer use. Direct emissions of fine particles and nitrogen oxide, mainly from the combustion of agricultural waste or cropland burning, and nitrous oxide is about 200 times more potent as a greenhouse gas compared to CO2. So we definitely, and you also have to worry about residence times. Methane may only last for about a decade, but nitrous oxide can last for a couple of centuries. Emissions from motor vehicles such as machinery and tractors, pumps, irrigation mechanisms, pumping water and distributing water, etc. And here is a nice infographic, very many chemical species here, which I won't read, but we are looking at methane, carbon dioxide, ammonia, non-methane volatile organic compounds, volatile because they quickly react and produce something else that we don't want. NOx in general, nitrogen oxides, of course NO2, nitrogen oxide, and nitrous oxide, N2O. Ozone, which is a very bad agent that will really destroy your lungs and create serious health issues, and particulate matter as well. So climate change is always a driver now. Ecosystem health and biodiversity loss are affected by that, as well as by all the agricultural activities and air pollution, and human health is affected from both sides and from below. Here we are looking at atmospheric processing, so physical and chemical transformations of the species we mentioned, like N2O, CO2 and methane, and there are secondary emissions of particulate matter, PM10, PM2.5 and so on. There is also atmospheric nitrogen deposition. Things get aerosolized and then they have dry deposition or wet deposition. Many aquatic ecosystems are affected by that as well. And there are also sources of primary PM2.5 altogether hammer human health fairly badly. And NMVOCs, non-methane volatile organic compounds, of course can produce methane as well, and that can help through receptors and impacts health and biodiversity, etc. Okay, there is atmospheric transport and transmission, and then there are inputs which produce emissions like mineral fertilizers, agrochemicals including pesticides, primary and secondary energy including fossil fuels, and on-farm emissions, so rice water management, so methane emission from paddies, soils emit crops, residue burning, fuel and energy consumption, energy enteric fermentation from livestock, and livestock also emit methane in addition to ammonia in terms of to methane. And post-farm also you have transportation and processing, distribution and retail, consumption and waste. Food waste overall is almost 6% of the total emissions, and it's an absolute no regret decision instead of reducing food waste, right? Reducing energy waste, food waste, water waste, and driving as little as possible, flying as little as possible are all important no regret decisions, I would say. International organizations including World Health Organization and FAO that I mentioned before, Food and Agricultural Organization, they need to develop an international agenda on health impacts and air pollution related to agriculture. There are already many efforts, of course. This is not something new, but there is renewed urgency. Foster One Health vision, where you are not only thinking of human health, but you're also thinking of animals and the environment itself, and also implementing biodiversity protection policies. Circulate new methodologies to report short-lived climate forcers, usually short-lived climate pollutants. So you have black carbon, methane, and I guess basically let's read them off here. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's leading activities concerning ammonia, black carbon, carbon monoxide, hydrogen, nitrogen oxides, non-methane volatile organic compounds, organic carbon, and sulfur dioxide. Okay, there are details provided in further technical notes that are dedicated to agriculture, forestry, and other land uses, what IPCC calls AFOLU. Okay. Another important point, energy policy makers benefit from international processes and initiatives. So obviously there is cross-border pollution as well, and you are exporting and importing large amounts of food grains and other products like vegetables, fruits, flowers, etc. So obviously all of those have to be accounted for in terms of ensure policymakers benefit from international processes and initiatives, not energy policy. Ensure policymakers benefit from international processes and initiatives. So there are many international nitrogen management system is one program. There is the South Asian Nitrogen Hub, and there is the United Nations Environment Assembly, United Nations UNECE, so framework for code for good agriculture and practice. So there are many agencies across WMO, FAO, which are also under the UN umbrella, and you have UNEP, UNDP, everybody is doing, hopefully things are working across silos and not too many silos are set up. What can the member states do? Acknowledge the health and economic benefits from reducing agricultural air pollution, establish and expand air quality monitoring networks, Maybe poorer countries need help with that. Since it's a global problem, rich countries can help there a little bit. We are asking a lot of money from rich countries, but they are very reluctant, of course. Support implementation of sustainable agricultural practices both in crop and livestock systems. We have discussed this elsewhere, so I'm not reading the bullet points because you can read the report, and we have discussed these details elsewhere already, so I'm going to skip those here. Develop a series of case studies for increasing awareness and disseminating information on local solutions. So all global warming impacts are local, so what is happening in people's backyards is going to matter, and solutions, mitigation is a global problem, even though there are local mitigation measures possible, like reducing emissions from agriculture adds up to global targets, but local solutions for managing agricultural emissions and impacts on health and pollution are going to be critical. Increase intersectoral cooperation, especially between agriculture, environment, and health ministries, but we should also include energy and water in there, and transportation, of course. What can research community do? Increase research on the impacts of air pollution from agriculture and policies and interventions to limit them. So there is a lot of research on air pollution as a whole, impacts on climate health. The Lancet keeps producing amazing reports, so does I think many other organizations do that, but WHO does as well. So medical community, increase public health sector focus. That's what medical community can contribute to this problem, that, again, we should think of no regret decisions. What do we mean by that? Basically, that means they always have benefits and co-benefits, so there is no regret in doing these things. What are regret decisions? When you ask farmers to not grow something, or not use fertilizers, or don't give them water, for example, and so on, which affects their lives, livelihoods, crop yields, incomes, and so on, livelihoods, incomes. Those are, decisions that need to be much more carefully taken to incentivize them or compensate them for losses. If land is becoming unsuitable for agriculture, what do you do with that, and so on, right? So no regret decisions are where there are no negative unintended consequences, so they must be implemented as far as possible. Okay, so let's leave this here. I was very brief, but it's a relatively short report that you must grab and read if you want to follow up on more details. Okay.